Everyone ignored the CEO's paralyzed son at the wedding, until a black single dad spoke up. The morning sun cast golden shadows across the sprawling Westfield estate, where every blade of grass seemed to have been individually placed by divine hands. CEO Marianne Fox stood at the edge of her daughter Isabella's wedding venue, her sharp eyes scanning the elaborate setup like a general surveying a battlefield. Everything had to be perfect. Everything was perfect. White silk ribbons danced in the gentle breeze, wrapped around towering oak trees that had witnessed centuries of celebrations. Crystal chandeliers hung impossibly from invisible wires, creating the illusion that diamonds were floating in midair. The aisle runner was hand-embroidered Italian lace that cost more than most people's cars, and the flower arrangements were so stunning they belonged in a museum. Marianne's company, Fox Industries, had weathered 3 economic downturns and emerged stronger each time. She'd built an empire by controlling every detail, by never leaving anything to chance. Today would be no different. Isabella's wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a statement. A declaration that the Fox family didn't just survive, they thrived. "Mrs. Fox, the photographer wants to know about the family positioning for the ceremony shots," came a voice behind her. James, the wedding coordinator, approached with his ever-present clipboard and the slightly frazzled look of someone managing a $1 million event. Marianne turned, her pearl earrings catching the light. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, elegant navy blue that commanded respect but didn't upstage the bride. "Have you seated Leo where we discussed?" "Yes, ma'am. He's positioned on the right side, about 15 feet from the main guest section. Perfect view of the altar, just like you requested." Just like she'd requested. The words should have felt reassuring, but something twisted in Marianne's stomach. She looked across the pristine lawn to where her son Leo sat in his sleek, custom wheelchair. At 23, he had inherited her sharp intellect and his father's kind eyes. The accident 7 years ago, a ski trip that went horribly wrong, had changed many things, but it hadn't diminished his brilliant smile or his way of making everyone around him feel heard. So why was he sitting alone? Leo was positioned with a clear view of everything, exactly as she'd planned. She told herself it was considerate, practical even. He wouldn't have to navigate through crowds, wouldn't risk getting his wheels caught on the uneven ground between chairs, wouldn't draw attention during the ceremony. It made perfect sense. But as guests began arriving in their designer clothes and practiced smiles, Marianne noticed something she hadn't anticipated. The careful positioning had created an invisible barrier. Leo might as well have been surrounded by glass walls. "Marianne, darling!" Patricia Westbrook, wife of the city's mayor, glided over in a cloud of expensive perfume and air kisses. "What an absolutely magical setup! Isabella must be beside herself with joy." "Thank you, Patricia. We wanted something memorable." Marianne's response was automatic, her mind still focused on Leo's placement. More guests arrived in waves. Business partners, old college friends, distant relatives who only appeared at weddings and funerals. They moved in predictable patterns, clustering around familiar faces, avoiding anyone who might complicate their afternoon of networking and champagne. Thomas Hartwell, her longtime business rival turned reluctant ally, approached with his trademark confident stride. "Marianne, you've outdone yourself. Though I have to ask." He paused, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Isn't Leo positioned rather separately? I mean, I understand the practical considerations, but he has the best view in the house." Marianne cut him off, her tone sharp enough to end the conversation. Thomas raised his hands in surrender and drifted away toward the bar. But his words lingered. Practical considerations. When had she started thinking of her son in terms of logistics rather than love? The truth was more complicated than she cared to admit. After Leo's accident, Marianne had thrown herself even deeper into work. Fox Industries had expanded into 3 new markets, acquired 2 competitors, and launched a revolutionary sustainable packaging line. Success had been her shield against the helplessness she'd felt watching her athletic, adventurous son learn to navigate a world that wasn't built for him. She'd convinced herself that building a stronger company meant building a stronger future for Leo. Every board meeting conquered, every deal closed, Every milestone achieved was armor against the questions that kept her awake at night. What if she wasn't enough? What if love wasn't enough? Mom? Isabella appeared beside her, radiant in her great-grandmother's vintage lace veil. At 25, she had Marianne's determination but her father's gentle nature. You look worried. Is everything okay? Marianne forced her CEO smile into place. Everything's perfect, sweetheart. You're perfect. Isabella glanced toward Leo, who was now scrolling through his phone while guests streamed past him like water around a stone. Maybe we should move Leo closer to. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes, Marianne interrupted. Everyone's already seated. We can't rearrange everything now. Isabella studied her mother's face, clearly wanting to say more, but a group of her college friends swept her away in a flurry of excited squeals and photo opportunities. Marianne watched her daughter disappear into the crowd, then looked back at Leo. He'd put his phone away and was now simply observing the scene, his expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met across the expanse of manicured grass. He smiled and gave her a small wave, the same gesture he'd used since childhood to say, "I'm okay, Mom." But was he really okay? Or had she been so focused on creating the perfect setting that she'd forgotten to include her own son in it? The string quartet began their prelude, and guests started moving toward their seats. Marianne watched the choreographed dance of social positioning, who sat with whom, who avoided whom, who made sure to be seen in the right company. It was a world she understood completely, a game she'd mastered decades ago. Yet, as she observed the careful social navigation, she realized something unsettling. The same instincts that made her a formidable CEO, the ability to read power dynamics, to position people strategically, to minimize risk and maximize advantage, had somehow extended to her own family. She positioned Leo not as a beloved son, but as a variable to be managed. The wedding photographer moved through the gathering crowd, capturing candid moments of joy and connection. But Marianne noticed he seemed to unconsciously avoid Leo's area, as if the wheelchair disrupted his vision of perfection. A group of her business associates had claimed the seats nearest to Leo, but they sat with their backs turned, engaged in animated discussions about market trends and developments. They could have easily included him. Leo had graduated summa cum laude with degrees in both business and environmental science, but they seemed oblivious to his presence. 5 minutes until the processional begins, James announced, his voice carrying across the lawn. Marianne took her position in the front row, her mind racing despite the serene setting. She'd spent months planning every detail of this day, from the specific shade of cream in the tablecloths to the exact timing of each course during dinner. She'd coordinated with 3 different vendors to ensure Leo's wheelchair could navigate every area of the venue. So why did she feel like she'd failed him in the most fundamental way possible? The musicians transitioned into the opening notes of Pachelbel's canon, and the crowd settled into expectant silence. Isabella would appear any moment, walking down that perfect aisle toward her perfect future. But as Marianne sat in her front row seat, surrounded by the fruits of her meticulous planning, she couldn't shake the image of Leo sitting alone, separated from the celebration by invisible walls she'd somehow helped to build. The ceremony was about to begin, and everything was exactly as she'd envisioned. So why did perfect suddenly feel so wrong? The processional began with Isabella's flower girls scattering rose petals like fairy dust across the Italian lace runner. Marianne felt her chest tighten with pride as she watched her daughter's friends glide down the aisle, each step perfectly timed to the music. This was the moment she dreamed of, her little girl becoming a woman, surrounded by beauty and tradition. But something was wrong. From her front row seat, Marianne had a perfect view of the altar where Isabella would soon stand with David, her college sweetheart turned successful architect. She also had a clear line of sight to Leo's position on the lawn. And what she saw made her stomach drop. Leo's wheelchair was sinking. It had started so subtly that at first she thought she was imagining it. The right wheel seemed slightly lower than usual, but the ceremony was beginning, and surely it was just the angle from where she sat. The string quartet swelled into the wedding march, and Isabella appeared at the far end of the aisle, radiant and glowing. Marianne forced herself to focus on her daughter, but her peripheral vision kept pulling her back to Leo. The sinking was becoming more pronounced. What had looked like perfectly manicured lawn from a distance was revealing its secrets. A soft patch where the sprinkler system had overwatered, or perhaps where the ground naturally collected moisture from the nearby oak trees. Leo shifted in his chair, trying to use his arms to push forward. The movement only made things worse. The wheel sank deeper, and now the left wheel was starting to follow suit. His sleek, expensive wheelchair, the one they'd researched for months to find the perfect balance of function and style, was being swallowed by the very perfection Marianne had insisted upon. Isabella was halfway down the aisle now, her train flowing behind her like liquid silk. Every camera was focused on her radiant smile, every guest was standing in respectful attention. This was the moment that would be preserved in photo albums and family memories forever. Except Leo was trapped. Marianne could see him more clearly now. He'd stopped trying to move, realizing that his efforts were only making the situation worse. His jaw was set in that particular way she recognized from his childhood, the expression he wore when he was trying very hard not to cry. Not from pain, but from the peculiar humiliation of being stuck, of being visible in his vulnerability, while everyone pretended not to see. Thomas Hartwell, sitting 3 seats away from Leo, glanced over briefly. His expression flickered with recognition of the problem, then uncertainty. He looked toward the altar, then back at Leo, clearly calculating whether intervening would cause more disruption than ignoring the situation. After a moment's hesitation, he turned his attention firmly back to the bride. The Westbrook family, positioned directly behind Leo, had the clearest view of his predicament. Patricia whispered something to her husband, and both of them looked uncomfortable. Mayor Westbrook half rose from his seat, as if he might help, but then the music swelled and he sat back down, trapped by the momentum of the moment. One by one, Marianne watched the wedding guests become aware of Leo's situation. It spread through the crowd like a whispered secret. The quick glances, the uncomfortable shifts, the sudden intense focus on the bride that seemed just a little too deliberate. Everyone could see that Leo needed help. No one wanted to be the person who disrupted Isabella's perfect moment. The wedding photographer, positioned strategically to capture every angle, had been moving fluidly around the ceremony space. But as he approached Leo's area and noticed the situation, his smooth movements became awkward. He raised his camera, then lowered it. Raised it again, angled it away from Leo's section entirely, and moved to a different position. Even through the lens of forever, Leo was being edited out. Isabella had reached the altar now, and David was lifting her veil with tender reverence. The officiant began the opening words of the ceremony, his voice carrying across the lawn with practiced authority. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." But Marianne wasn't listening to the words she'd helped choose, wasn't watching the moment she'd spent a fortune to create. She was watching her son sink slowly into the earth while 100 people pretended it wasn't happening. Leo's eyes found hers across the distance. For just a moment, his careful composure cracked, and she saw the little boy who used to run to her when he was hurt, who believed his mother could fix anything. The look on his face wasn't asking for rescue, it was asking for acknowledgement. Just one person to see him, to validate that what was happening to him mattered. The soft ground was claiming more of his wheelchair now. The armrests were noticeably lower than they should be, and Leo had to adjust his position to maintain his balance. Each small movement seemed to make the situation worse, as if the lawn itself was conspiring against him. "Do you, Isabella Fox, take David Michael Peterson?" The officiant continued, and the crowd leaned forward slightly, drawn into the sacred moment. Marianne felt paralyzed by an impossible choice. Stand up now, rush to Leo's aid, and forever be the mother who disrupted her daughter's wedding ceremony. Or stay seated, maintain the perfect facade, and let her son struggle alone while everyone pretended not to notice. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd positioned Leo where he was supposed to have the best view, where he wouldn't be in anyone's way, where the logistics would be simple. Instead, she'd placed him in the one spot where the ground couldn't support him, too far from help, too visible to ignore, too polite to interrupt. Leo caught her eye again and gave her a small shake of his head, the same gesture he'd used since childhood to say, "I've got this, Mom, don't worry." But his wheelchair was sinking deeper, and his "I've got this" was becoming, "I'm trapped, and we're all going to pretend it's not happening." The ceremony continued around them, a perfect bubble of joy and tradition, while 15 feet away, Marianne's son disappeared inch by inch into the ground that was supposed to showcase their family's success. And everyone, absolutely everyone, was looking the other way. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." The crowd erupted in applause as David swept Isabella into a kiss that would be replayed in wedding videos for decades. Cameras flashed, tears flowed, and for one perfect moment, the world seemed to revolve around the magic of new love. Everyone was standing, clapping, celebrating, everyone except Leo, who was now trapped so deeply in the soft earth that his wheelchair's seat was nearly level with the ground around him. In the back row, as far from the action as possible while still being technically present, sat Andre Washington with his 8-year-old daughter Harper. They'd arrived late. Andre's ancient Honda had decided to overheat on the highway, and had slipped into the only available seats just as the ceremony began. Andre wasn't supposed to be here, not really. He was David's cousin, but distant enough that the invitation had felt more like politeness than genuine inclusion. The kind of obligation invite you send because family is family, even if you haven't spoken in 3 years. He'd almost declined. Between his job at the community center, Harper's soccer schedule, and the general exhaustion of single parenthood, a fancy wedding felt like stepping into someone else's universe. But Harper had insisted. "Daddy, we never go to parties. And I want to see a Rio princess dress." So here they sat, Andre in his only good suit, the one he'd bought for job interviews and wore to church on Easter, and Harper in a yellow sundress that was already wrinkled from the car ride. Her flower crown, made from daisies she'd picked from their apartment complex's garden, sat crooked on her head, and her sneakers were the practical kind that could handle playground adventures but looked decidedly out of place among the sea of designer heels. While the adults around them maintained their polite attention on the bride and groom, Harper was doing what 8-year-olds do best, noticing absolutely everything with unfiltered curiosity. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging on Andre's sleeve. "Why is that man stuck?" Andre followed her gaze to where Leo sat, now visibly struggling. Other guests were beginning to notice too, but in that peculiar adult way of seeing something uncomfortable, and immediately looking elsewhere. "Hush, baby," Andre murmured automatically, then really looked at what Harper was seeing. The wheelchair was sinking deeper by the minute. Leo had given up trying to move and was now gripping the armrests, his knuckles white with the effort of maintaining his composure. The soft ground had claimed nearly half of his wheels, and his position was becoming increasingly precarious. Andre scanned the crowd of well-dressed guests. Surely someone closer would help. Surely the family had noticed. But as seconds ticked by and the applause began to fade, it became clear that everyone was caught in the same trap of social paralysis, seeing the problem but unwilling to be the one to disrupt the perfect moment. "He looks scared," Harper said louder this time. Several guests turned to shush her, their expressions ranging from annoyed to embarrassed. But Harper wasn't interested in adult social cues. She was 8 years old, and in her world, when someone needed help, you helped them. It was really that simple. Before Andre could stop her, Harper slipped out of her seat and began walking purposefully toward Leo. Not running, she wasn't trying to cause a scene, but moving with the kind of determined focus that Andre recognized from every playground dispute she'd ever mediated and every stray cat she'd ever rescued. "Harper, honey, wait!" Andre started to call after her, but his voice was lost in the general murmur of post-ceremony conversation. The little girl in the crooked flower crown and practical sneakers walked straight past clusters of designer-clad adults who were all very carefully not looking at the man sinking into their perfect lawn. She navigated between groups discussing business deals and vacation plans, past the photographer who was now determinedly focusing on close-ups of the bride's bouquet, past the wedding coordinator who was frantically checking his timeline. Leo noticed her approach first. After an hour of being invisible to everyone around him, the sight of someone, anyone, walking directly toward him was so surprising that his careful composure almost cracked entirely. Harper stopped right in front of his wheelchair, planted her hands on her hips in a gesture Andre recognized as her problem-solving stance, and looked at the situation with the kind of practical assessment that adults had somehow forgotten how to do. "You okay?" she asked, as if it was the most natural question in the world. The simple directness of it, no awkward dancing around the obvious, no pretending nothing was wrong, just one human being asking another if they needed help, made Leo's throat tight with unexpected emotion. I'm a little stuck," he admitted, and for the first time since the sinking began, he smiled. Not the careful, public smile he'd been maintaining, but a real one. Harper nodded seriously, as if he'd presented her with an interesting puzzle rather than an embarrassing predicament. She walked around to the back of his wheelchair and began examining the situation with scientific curiosity. "These wheels are really stuck," she announced loud enough that several nearby guests finally turned to look. "But I'd bet if someone lifts while I pull." She grabbed the back of the wheelchair and pulled with all her 8-year-old might. The chair didn't budge, but her flower crown slipped completely sideways, and a daisy fell onto Leo's shoulder. She said, undeterred. "I think I need backup." That's when she looked back toward her father, who was watching the entire scene with a mixture of pride, embarrassment, and growing understanding that his daughter had just done what 100 adults couldn't bring themselves to do. She'd seen someone who needed help, and she'd decided to help them. Andre loosened his tie, stood up, and began walking toward his daughter and the young man she'd decided to rescue. Andre had spent most of his adult life being underestimated. At 34, he'd learned to read rooms quickly, to spot the people who saw his brown skin and assumed he belonged in the service industry rather than as a guest, who heard his slight southern accent and made assumptions about his education, who looked at him walking alone with Harper and created entire narratives about irresponsible black fathers. But he'd also learned something else over the years. Sometimes being underestimated was an advantage. It meant people weren't watching when you did something unexpected, like raising a daughter who saw the world with clear eyes and an open heart. As he approached Leo and Harper, Andre could feel the subtle shift in attention from the nearby guests. Conversations didn't stop, but they became quieter, more pointed. He was aware of being watched in that particular way he'd grown accustomed to. The way people observe when they're not sure if they should be concerned, grateful, or embarrassed. Leo looked up as Andre reached them, and for a moment, their eyes met with perfect understanding. Here was a man who knew what it felt like to be reduced to other people's assumptions, meeting a man who was currently trapped by other people's politeness. "Well," Andre said, surveying the situation with the same practical assessment Harper had used. "Looks like this fancy grass has some serious trust issues." His voice carried just enough humor to acknowledge the absurdity without making Leo feel like the punchline. Leo laughed, not the polite chuckle he'd been using all day, but a genuine sound of relief and appreciation. "Yeah, apparently it's not impressed by expensive wheels. Grass can be real particular about who it likes," Andre agreed, rolling up his sleeves. "Harper, you did good spotting this. But I think we need to try a different approach than pulling." Harper nodded seriously, stepping back to give her father room to work but staying close enough to supervise. "The wheels are really stuck, Daddy." Andre crouched down to examine the situation more closely. The wheelchair's wheels had sunk nearly 8 inches into what looked like solid ground but was actually a deceptively soft patch where irrigation runoff had created a hidden bog. The more Leo had tried to move, the deeper the wheels had settled. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," Andre said, positioning himself behind the wheelchair. "I'm going to lift the back end while you use your arms to push forward. The trick is to get the wheels up and out in one smooth motion, not fighting against the suction." It was clear from the way Andre assessed the situation that this wasn't his first time solving a mobility problem. His movements were confident, practiced, not the awkward hesitation of someone who never interacted with a wheelchair before. "You've done this before," Leo observed, impressed despite himself. "My buddy Marcus at the community center uses a chair," Andre explained, getting a firm grip on the wheelchair's frame. We've had some adventures with curbs, potholes, and one memorable incident involving a beach volleyball court. Did you get him out? Eventually. Though we had to sacrifice a perfectly good pair of flip-flops to the sand gods. Andre's grin was infectious. Ready on 3? Leo positioned his hands on the wheel rims, feeling more hopeful than he had in the past hour. Ready. 1, 2, 3. Andre lifted with smooth, controlled strength while Leo pushed forward. For a moment, nothing happened except the soft sucking sound of mud refusing to release its prize. Then, with a wet pop that was audible to half the wedding guests, the wheelchair came free. The momentum carried them forward faster than either had expected. Leo rolled several feet across the solid ground before he could stop, and Andre stumbled backward, his dress shoes slipping on the now exposed muddy patch. For a terrifying second, it looked like Andre was going to fall backward into the very bog that had trapped Leo. But he caught his balance at the last moment, windmilling his arms in a way that was both athletic and utterly graceless. Harper burst into delighted giggles. "Daddy, you looked like a cartoon." Leo was laughing too, the kind of full-body laughter that comes from relief and genuine joy mixed together. "That was the smoothest rescue I've ever been part of." "Smooth is my middle name," Andre said, brushing grass stains off his hands with mock dignity. "Andre Smooth Washington, at your service." The sound of their laughter finally broke through the polite bubble that had surrounded Leo's predicament. Nearby guests turned to look, and seeing the crisis resolved, began to clap. It started with just a few people, then spread outward as others realized what had happened. Thomas Hartwell, who had agonized over whether to help, clapped with particular enthusiasm, his face flushed with something that might have been shame. Patricia Westbrook applauded while whispering urgently to her husband about why they hadn't acted sooner. But the person clapping loudest was Marianne Fox. From her front row seat, she had watched the entire rescue unfold. She'd seen her son's face transform from resigned endurance to genuine joy. She'd watched a stranger treat Leo not as a problem to be solved or a situation to be managed, but as a person worth knowing. And she'd realized something that made her chest tight with a mixture of pride and regret. In 30 seconds, Andre had given Leo something she'd been trying to provide through months of careful planning and positioning: the simple dignity of being seen, acknowledged, and helped without drama or pity. Leo caught his mother's eye across the lawn and waved, not the careful "I'm okay" gesture he'd been using all day, but a real wave of happiness. For the first time since the ceremony began, he looked like he belonged exactly where he was. "So," Andre said, straightening his tie and grinning at Leo, "now that we've conquered the lawn, think there's any chance they've got decent cake at this shindig?" The reception was in full swing by the time Marianne finally made her way to the hors d'oeuvres table. She'd spent the past hour doing what she did best: managing, coordinating, ensuring everything flowed seamlessly from ceremony to celebration. The photographer had gotten his shots, the caterers were on schedule, and Isabella was radiant as she moved through her guests like a princess in a fairy tale. But Marianne's mind kept drifting back to that moment on the lawn. The image of Andre lifting Leo's wheelchair with such casual competence, the sound of her son's genuine laughter, the way a complete stranger had solved in 30 seconds what she'd been unable to address in 30 minutes of internal debate. She found Andre exactly where she expected, not networking by the bar or positioning himself near the important guests, but standing with Harper near the elaborate spread of appetizers, both of them examining the offerings with scientific curiosity. "I think that's salmon," Harper was saying, pointing at a delicate canopy topped with pink fish and microgreens. "But it's fancy salmon. Like salmon wearing a tuxedo." Andre laughed. "Everything here is wearing a tuxedo, baby girl. Even the crackers look overdressed." Marianne approached them, carrying 2 glasses of champagne and feeling uncharacteristically nervous. In boardrooms, she commanded attention effortlessly. At charity galas, she worked crowds like a seasoned leader. But approaching this man who had done what she couldn't, or wouldn't, felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory. "Excuse me," she said, extending one of the champagne glasses toward Andre. "I wanted to thank you for what you did for Leo." Andre turned, and up close, Marianne could see the laugh lines around his eyes, the genuine warmth in his expression. "Mrs. Fox, right? No thanks necessary. Just glad we could help. Please call me Marianne." She glanced down at Harper, who was now balancing 3 different appetizers on a small plate with the concentration of an architect. "And you must be Harper. Leo told me you were the one who spotted the problem first." Harper looked up, a bit of cream cheese on her chin. He seemed stuck. And sad. "I don't like when people look sad at parties." The simplicity of it, the pure, uncomplicated logic of an 8-year-old, made Marianne's throat tight. "That was very kind of you. Daddy says we should always notice when people need help," Harper said matter-of-factly, then returned to her careful examination of the catering display. Andre sipped his champagne, studying Marianne with the same direct attention Harper had given Leo. "She's right, though. He did look sad. Isolated." There was no judgment in his voice, just observation. Marianne felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I thought I was being considerate. Giving him space, a good view, keeping him from having to navigate crowds. But you were managing a situation instead of including a person," Andre said gently. "I get it. Sometimes we think protecting someone means keeping them separate." The words hit harder than any business rival's criticism ever had. "You sound like you speak from experience." Andre nodded toward Harper, who had moved on to examining the dessert table with the same methodical approach. "When Harper was 5, she was the only black kid in her preschool class. For months, I thought I was protecting her by preparing her for every possible slight, every awkward moment, every way she might be made to feel different." He paused, watching his daughter charm one of the waiters into explaining the ingredients in a particularly elaborate petit four. "But all my protection was actually separating her from just being a kid. I was so focused on managing how others might see her that I forgot to let her just be seen. For who she is, not what she represents or what problems she might face." Marianne absorbed this, recognizing uncomfortable parallels. "How did you realize?" "Her teacher told me Harper had started asking why Daddy was always worried about her making friends. Kids are smart, they pick up on everything we think we're hiding." Andre's smile was rueful. "I realized I was teaching her to see herself as a problem to be managed instead of a person to be celebrated." The insight landed like a physical blow. Marianne thought about all the careful positioning, the strategic seating, the logistics she'd prioritized over simply letting Leo be part of his sister's day. "I built an empire by controlling variables," she said quietly. "I think I started seeing Leo as a variable instead of my son." "It's not about control," Andre said. "It's about trust. Trusting that people, most people, want to do the right thing when given the chance. Trusting that your son can handle more than you think. Trusting that inclusion is messier than isolation, but it's also where the real joy happens." Marianne watched Harper approach a group of Leo's college friends, seamlessly inserting herself into their conversation about something that was making them all laugh. The little girl moved through the social landscape with none of the careful calculation Marianne had used to position her own son. "Harper seems to trust everyone," Marianne observed. "Not everyone," Andre corrected. "But she trusts herself to handle whatever comes up. There's a difference." He finished his champagne and set the glass on a nearby table. "Besides, most people are better than we give them credit for. They just need someone to show them it's okay to engage. Like what you did today. Like what Harper did today," Andre corrected. "I just followed her lead. Kids see what we adults have trained ourselves to overlook." Across the reception area, Marianne could see Leo talking animatedly with David's college roommate, his earlier tension completely gone. Whatever Andre had done, or more accurately, whatever Harper had started, had shifted something fundamental. "I owe you both an apology," Marianne said. "And not just for today. For assuming that control was the same thing as care." Andre shrugged. "We all do what we think is best with the information we have. The trick is staying open to new information." "Daddy!" Harper appeared beside them, slightly breathless with excitement. "Leo says there's going to be dancing, and he asked if I want to learn how to dance with someone in a wheelchair." Can I? Please? Andre looked at Marianne, eyebrows raised in question. Marianne felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of worry and control she'd been carrying for years. I think that sounds wonderful. As Harper raced back toward Leo, Marianne realized she'd spent so much time trying to create the perfect environment for her son that she'd forgotten to trust him to create his own perfect moments. For the first time all day, she felt like maybe, just maybe, perfect wasn't about control at all. The band struck up their first dance set just as the sun began to dip behind the oak trees, casting golden light across the reception area. Isabella and David took the floor for their choreographed first dance, moving together with the kind of practiced grace that spoke of hours of lessons and pure joy in each other's company. Marianne watched from her table, but her attention kept drifting to where Leo sat with Harper, both of them laughing at something on his phone. Gone was the careful isolation of the morning. Leo's wheelchair was positioned right at the edge of the dance floor, surrounded by a cluster of David's college friends who were debating the merits of various wedding songs with the passionate intensity of music critics. Okay, but hear me out, Leo was saying, gesturing with the animation he'd inherited from his father. If you're going to play Sweet Caroline, you have to commit to the full experience. I'm talking coordinated BH from every person here. That's what I've been saying, Harper exclaimed, bouncing in her chair. Songs are supposed to make people happy, not just stand there being polite. Thomas Hartwell, nursing his third glass of champagne and clearly feeling guilty about his earlier inaction, leaned into the conversation. You know, Leo, I've always wondered, is there a protocol for wheelchair dancing? I mean, that probably sounds ignorant, but not ignorant at all, Leo interrupted, his tone genuinely encouraging. Want to see? Before anyone could object, Leo rolled onto the dance floor with the confidence of someone who had long ago decided that life was too short to sit on the sidelines. The conversation cluster followed him, drawn by curiosity and the kind of momentum that happens when someone refuses to be embarrassed about taking up space. Harper, Leo called over the music. Ready for that dance lesson? Harper practically levitated with excitement, racing to join him as the band smoothly transitioned into a more upbeat song. Leo showed her how to move with the rhythm while staying connected to his chair, how to spin around him while he provided the steady center, how to create patterns that incorporated his wheels as part of the choreography rather than working around them. Within minutes, they had attracted an audience. Isabella, still glowing in her wedding dress, approached with David in tow. Leo, this is amazing, Isabella called out over the music. Can you teach us? And suddenly, the dance floor became a masterclass in inclusive celebration. Leo demonstrated moves, Harper provided enthusiastic commentary, and David's college friends proved surprisingly eager students. The photographer, who had spent the day carefully framing shots around Leo's presence, found himself capturing some of the most joyful images of the entire celebration. Patricia Westbrook, who had spent the ceremony agonizing over whether to help, approached Marianne's table with tears in her eyes. I feel like such a fool, she said quietly. We were all so worried about doing the wrong thing that we forgot to do the right thing. Marianne nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. I think we were all protecting the wrong things. On the dance floor, Leo had become the center of a complex, beautiful chaos. Harper was teaching Isabella how to do the wheelchair weave. David was attempting something that looked like breakdancing but with less grace, and even some of the older guests had joined in, laughing at their own awkward attempts to keep up with Leo's surprisingly smooth moves. Where did he learn to dance like that? Marianne wondered aloud. Andre appeared beside her table, holding a fresh glass of champagne and grinning at the scene. Adaptive dance classes, he said. Harper and I tried a few sessions last year at the community center. Your son was one of the instructors. Marianne stared at him. Leo teaches dance? Every Saturday morning. Kids and adults, all abilities. He's got about 30 regular students and a waiting list twice as long. Andre sat down beside her, his expression gentle. There's a lot about your son that might surprise you, if he gave him the chance to show you. The words should have stung, but instead, They filled Marianne with something she hadn't felt in years: genuine curiosity about her own child. When had she stopped asking Leo about his life and started managing it instead? On the dance floor, the music had shifted again, and now Leo was leading the entire wedding party in what appeared to be an improvised conga line. His wheelchair anchored the front, setting the rhythm, while a chain of laughing, stumbling, joyful people followed behind him. Isabella grabbed Marianne's hand. "Mom, come on! Leo's teaching us the Fox family traditional wedding dance." "We don't have a traditional wedding dance," Marianne protested, even as she allowed herself to be pulled toward the celebration. "We do now," Isabella laughed, and suddenly Marianne found herself part of the conga line, one hand on David's shoulder, following her son's lead as he guided them around the dance floor with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his right to take up space. As they moved together, the CO and the single dad, the bride and groom, the little girl in sneakers and the society matrons in designer heels, Marianne realized this was what she'd been trying to create all along. Not perfection, but connection. Not control, but joy. The music swelled, Harper's laughter rang out above the melody, and Leo's smile was bright enough to power the string lights overhead. And for the first time in years, Marianne Fox, master of industry, controller of outcomes, manager of details, stopped planning and started dancing. Later, when the wedding photos were developed, one image would become legendary in family albums: Leo at the center of the dance floor, arms raised in celebration, surrounded by a circle of people who had learned something important about what it means to truly see each other. But the moment itself was even better than any photograph could capture. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely, beautifully real. It was everything a celebration should be.